The humble scrapyard. We all have memories of these, whether it's aimlessly walking around for the sake of it just to look at some cool old cars or looking for parts. The scrapyard has been a staple of most motorists in the UK for decades, but these yards have experienced a decline and may soon disappear. In this video we explore one of the most important parts of our car industry in the UK, self-service breakers yards, and why they are going extinct. One of my fondest scrapyard memories is when I was 18, I just passed my test, and I needed a few bits for my Grand Punto. I looked around the few scrapyards in Scunthorpe that were left, looking at all sorts. Old Metros that had clearly seen a few decades worth of Peugeots on top of them, and of course the bits I was looking for. I can even remember nearly buying a Civic EK that had just been dropped off. Another memory of mine was going with my dad one afternoon to have a look at some old Rovers for no particular reason when I was a lot younger, although he did need a few bits for his Cavalier SRI. Hello everybody and welcome to this video. This video of course is about the humble scrapyard. If you have any scrapyard memories, drop me a comment below and let me know your memories of any cool yards that I haven't managed to cover, and let me know as well if there's a yard tour that you'd like me to do, or you own a scrapyard, as I'd love to do a yard tour. Now, make sure to subscribe to the channel because it really does help me out and you get to see more of this. Make sure to like the video, and without further delay, let's get into the history of the scrapyard. In the early days of the motor car in the early 20th century, scrapyards were virtually non-existent due to the nature of the cars at the time. This is because of how new the technology was. Cars were considered a luxury and priced accordingly, with each one being hand-built. During the pre-war era, cars were treated with such great care, the idea of scrapping a car as we know it today wasn't practiced. The lack of volume, price of cars being so high, and due to this, them being so well maintained and cared for, it meant there wouldn't have been enough volume to fill up a scrapyard or a lockup. Instead of these early cars being confined to a muddy yard, local mechanics would refurbish parts to prolong the lives of other cars, getting a car in every so often as a donor vehicle to provide cheaper parts for a running car. Then came World War II, which meant a lot of these cars were then donated to the war effort to produce tanks, planes, and ammunition. Post-war, of course, everything changed. With the rebuilding of the major economies saw the need for cheap mass-market cars, which meant a surge in car manufacturing. More customers meant more cars, which means more end-of-life cars to fill up a yard. During the post-World War II era, the scrapyard as we know it today was born, sprawling with old scrap cars, sometimes new, sometimes crashed, but most of the time end-of-life. With the price of scrap metal on the rise, there was more and more incentive for motorists to scrap their old models at local vehicle breakers yards. This, in conjunction with cheaper land and lack of regulations, led to an increase in breakers yards, allowing some iconic scrap yards to rise during the mid to late 20th century. A few of these legendary scrap yards are as follows. Medlars in Norfolk, founded by Lenny Medlar, who made a name for himself operating a large scrap metal and breakers yard out the back of his property. The yard grew acres and acres, with some incredible cars littering the site. Unfortunately though, Lenny died in 1989 and the yard was taken over by his wife. Sadly, the upkeep of this yard was simply too much to handle, and nature moved in, claiming it once more. Another is G.R. Harris in Chichester. Established in 1952, this is a family-run business specialising in self-service car salvage and recycling, but after more than 70 years in business, this site is set to close. These are just some of my top picks. Let me know your most legendary scrapyard and scrapyard memories in the comments below. Eva Bros is one of my favourite from my childhood from Scunthorpe. This yard is well known locally and located near the steelworks in Scunthorpe. It was a real treasure trove and it's still in operation today. I can remember climbing the stacks of old cars looking for bits when I first passed my test. Sadly though, the days of many yards were numbered. By the early 90s, the maturity of the car industry meant they were producing cars that lasted longer for cheaper. The amount of cars as well that had been produced, and subsequently the amount of cars on the road, had significantly increased, leading to lawmakers becoming concerned with their disposal. In a nutshell though, the government environmentalists thought there would be too many cars to put in scrapyards or keep on the road, leading to a waste epidemic. With the turn of the millennia, the UK government stepped in with regulation, introducing rules on how cars are scrapped to limit the environmental impact of their disposal. This of course was a double-edged sword. One, it aimed to stop some of the cowboys in the industry excessively polluting and promoted more efficient recycling, but on the other hand, it meant that there was a level of control not wanted by some of the people who ran the yards, meaning they had to close down. Then came the big one in the late 2000s. With the country hit by an economic crisis in 2008, one of the sectors most affected was the car industry. In order to stimulate the economy, and more importantly the car industry, owners of older cars were given incentives to trade their older cars in for newer vehicles. In most cases, owners got around £2,000 to trade in their old car and buy a new one. This, of course, further damaged the car scrappage industry as the government weighed in, resulting in a lot of their supply of new stock being purchased by the government for prices the scrapyard owners simply couldn't afford, making their offering uncompetitive. This resulted in a further decline. Some of these cars, though, are still sat there today. All of these blows to the industry over the past decades, the rising costs of land and labour, as well as the throwaway culture, with the majority of people leasing cars, have resulted in most large-scale self-service yards closing down. The rise of e-commerce is also another factor, with the yards we knew all those years ago mostly being confined to the history books. But it's not all bad news. For most car owners, the rise of eBay and other online commerce platforms has resulted in incredible part quality and availability, with these once sprawling yards being condensed into smaller, more efficient operations, with nationwide and sometimes global reach. With the march of technology, the good old scrapyard has marched with it. Car breakers' yards haven't gone away, they have simply condensed. Some self-service yards do still exist, however, but they operate on a different model. The most notable is You Pull It, a series of yards around the country that allow people to enter for a fee and remove parts themselves, paying for them on exit. The yards of the past, though, are mostly gone. The yards we used to climb stacks and stacks of cars on to get to that one part at the top. The yards that had that one car in the corner that had always been there, slowly being reclaimed by the earth it came from. This is why it's important to support these local businesses through honest trade and appreciate them for what they are. Good old-fashioned scrapyards. The scrapyard is one of those just amazing institutions in any country, but of course I'm from the UK, so I'm covering that. But this can apply to most countries around the world, except for America, because they have loads of land. Well, it does kind of apply over there as well, to be honest with you, in more populated areas. But the scrapyard, to be honest with you, is one of those things I really miss. I miss walking around an incredibly muddy yard that had questionable coloured water and just picking bits off of cars, and you know, you're getting a badge here and there and paying 50p for each of them. You know what I mean? It's those proper memories. And you also used to see, one of the other brilliant things I used to remember is there was this awful Citroen Saxo, chrome mirrors. Now it's not considered awful because Max Power is back. But at the time, in the sort of stance era of cars in about 2015, 2016, this was considered terrible. So anyway, with a bit of context, I'll carry on. There was this Saxo that I noticed years and years ago. Blue Citroen Saxo VTS with awful Lexus lights and these terrible bullet chrome mirrors. I saw that car when I passed my test in a yard, a tiny small scale yard. Absolutely sprawling amount of space, but I think it had about 8 cars in it, all stacked on top of each other. The most inefficient operation I've ever seen. And these cars were just incredible. But I saw that and I was like, gosh damn, how the mighty have fallen. The once proud boy racer Saxo has succumbed to its owner and it had been smashed in at the front. So that poor thing had obviously met its maker. Now, the scrapyards, of course, this video is by no means saying they're dying off, because the scrapyard of yesteryear, yes, I'd say that's mostly gone, which is incredibly sad. But scrapyards have evolved. You could run a scrapyard out of your backyard if you wanted to, of course, if you had the right permits and everything, which, you know, is a double-edged sword, because, like I said, you can end up with people absolutely destroying the environment and, you know, feeding the ducks antifreeze, or you can end up with, you know, commerce and people recycling cars for a good purpose. But again, not everybody is the same. Some people go for one way, some people go the other way, and you can't control that. But scrapyards are just one of those things that have always fascinated me. I've always wanted to work in one as well, believe it or not. That's one of my fantasy jobs, is working in a scrapyard for a day. So if anybody can provide me with a scrapyard experience, let me know. The other thing as well about scrapyards is, of course, this is sort of a bit of a, people say they're not as good as they are anymore in terms of the quality of the cars in them. Of course they're not going to be that good because nobody's really scrapping Metros anymore. Nobody's really scrapping RS2000s or anything like that, anything that we saw. I mean, I can remember seeing, GSI 4x4 Cavaliers, and I'm a big Cavalier guy. I can remember seeing those in scrapyards years ago. But it's weird because somebody a few years younger than me will go into there and like, oh my God, is that an Abarth Punto? And they'll be absolutely astonished by that. And in about 10 years, they'll go, I can't believe we were scrapping Abarth Puntos. What were we on? And it's the same thing with previous generations. I can't believe we were scrapping Cavalier GSIs. Can't believe I scrapped my Fiesta Cosworth, I've been told. You hear it all. And it's really incredible and really odd to look back, especially at these cars like, XR3Is, Rover SD1s, Rover SD1 Vitesses, P6 3500Ss, all these cars that have been scrapped. And in that document from the scrappage scheme, you can see as well there's a lot of cool cars on there, Peugeot rallies, and you've got, I think there's some SD1s on there, there's a couple of P5Bs on there, there's P4s on there, there's Triumph 2000s on there, there's all sorts, and there's 4 Nissan Skylines on there. It's just incredible seeing all this sort of stuff be scrapped. But if all of these hadn't been scrapped, the supply of these cars would be plentiful now. Therefore, they wouldn't be worth as much, and in turn, they wouldn't be as appreciated as they are because they would be considered common and not that rare. So, and of course, that could also mean that there's more terrible quality ones about because there hasn't been enough parts availability to keep the good ones on the road. So it's one of those things really, and it's just a right discussion. So I'm really into doing yard tours. I've tried to do a few yards, but I've not really had any sort of bites from people other than one or two. So this is sort of a bit of a open ask. Does anybody run a scrapyard or anybody know of a yard that I can do a tour around, please, because I love scrapyards? Please let me know. I do have an email contact. You can just comment below. You can drop me a message on Instagram. All linked in the description, and we can get something set up so we can really appreciate the good old scrapyard. Without further waffling now, I'll leave you in peace. Thank you for watching. Keep watching. Remember to subscribe for more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.